What I'm presenting to you today is the result of a long time collaboration with two colleagues and friends, Doctors Dorothy Fagrezi and Elisabetta Wieselberghi from University of Georgia, Athens, and Institute of Science and Technology of Cognition in Rome. For me, Dori and Elisa. I was very lucky to have them both in my life, that we started this collaboration almost 20 years ago. And although they were not my former mentors or advisors, we began this collaboration when I was in the beginning of my career. I was a postdoc, and they were both already established researchers and professors with a lot of experience with Capuchin monkeys. And they certainly acted as my unofficial mentors in many instances of my career. They certainly had extreme positive impact in the outcome of my career that I consider successful in my country in primatology. So I think I'm adding negative evidence to the point of view of Al-Shabli and collaborators just published last week on Nature, their point of view on about gender, mentoring, and career outcomes. I think I'm an example of a great outcome having women around me. What I'm presenting today is also the result due to the generosity of the family Fonseca de Oliveira that opened their land to our research almost 20 years ago, and they are still there supporting us, not only for their generosity and kindness of having us there, but because of their view of life. They really praise the nature where they live, and they make all the possible efforts for them to preserve the habitat, the natural habitat where the monkeys live and where we conduct our research. And finally, what I'm presenting today is also the result of this continuous work in the field with this team of field assistants that are the family and local people that bring to us also their local and traditional knowledge about the monkeys and other animals' behavior and all the nature around there. And this huge team of students, current students and former students that are now our colleagues, and that we sometimes are fortunate to encounter in meetings around the world. So let's turn to the non-human part of this collaboration, the Capuchin monkeys that we study. I would like to introduce the Capuchin monkeys for perhaps some of you that don't know them. In fact, we work with the genus Sapagius, so-called the robust Capuchin monkeys. These are 8 recognized phylogenetic species that together occupy a wide range of habitats across South America. In this wide geographic distribution has been generally attributed to their behavioral plasticity that would confer adaptability to different environmental conditions. The most striking variation is in their feeding behavior. They are omnivorous primates that include a wide variety of items in their diet to complement their preferential frugivory. But they don't only vary in the items they eat, so different fruit species in different areas because different species are available, but also in their diet composition. In some areas, they can become much more insectivorous or in other areas, like in the southeastern Atlantic forest, where I study these monkeys also, they can include a large amount of leaves and become almost folivores. But most importantly, for the purpose of this talk, they can extract foods that are inaccessible for most vertebrates, such as palm trees, employing complex extractive foraging techniques. And they are very famous, birded capuchin monkeys, the Sapajos libidinosus. They are famous now for their use of tools in feeding context. They crack open very hard fruits using stone tools, stones as hammer and anvils. We first described this behavior 16 years ago now for the population of Fazenda Boa Vista, an area located in the transition between the biomes Cerrado and Caatinga in the northeastern region of Brazil. And today, due to our long-term research there, we can affirm that tool use is indeed an enduring and customary practice for most individuals of two, at that time, now 5 groups that we study systematically. And today, in fact, we know that many wild populations of capuchin monkeys habitually use tools as part of their feeding behavior. Up to now, reports of tool use in the genus Sapajos are restricted to these 3 species: Sapajos libidinosus that I just mentioned, Sapajos xanthosternus, and Sapajos flavius. And not in we don't have reports to for the other 5 species. This could indicate a genetic predisposition for tool use. However, we are fortunate enough that Sapajos xanthosternus and Sapajos flavius occur in the Atlantic forest, and some populations are also in the more xeric and open biomes of areas of Caatinga. In these 2 species, only the populations that occur in Caatinga use tools and not the forest populations. So this favors the idea that environmental conditions are related to the emergency of tool use in populations and species of robust capuchin monkeys, the genus Sapajos. Until a little time ago, we would justify the study of not only because it's super cool to study capuchin monkeys and tool use in non-human species, but we would justify these studies because capuchin monkeys belong to the Platyrrhini, so it's an primate infraorder that diverged from the old world monkeys from the Catarrhini like around 40 million years ago. So this would mean a completely independent origin of tool use, and this could help us to investigate hypotheses about the evolutionary factors correlated to tool use, increasing external validity to these hypotheses. But more recently, we are discussing, and there is a growing consensus, I could say, that developmental processes, including inclusive inheritance and niche construction, affect biological evolution, the direction and the rate of evolution. And these developmental processes are related to phenotypic variation. So I also, what I'm trying to do today is discuss that studying traditional tool use in capuchin monkeys offers an opportunity to discuss whether and how culture or tradition affects biology in the sense that we are now discussing in this new or this extended evolutionary synthesis. So this is what I'm going to do. I will show how the tradition of tool use affects several aspects of the life of the Capuchin monkeys of Fazenda Boa Vista. When we began this collaboration, me and Dori and Elisa, almost 20 years ago, the state of art is brilliant, summarized by Dan and Linda Fedigan in this book, The Complete Capuchin. The state of art about the cognition about to use is that they would, based on several experiments conducted in laboratory conditions with captive monkeys raised in captivity, was that they would end up using tools, solving tasks that demand tool use due to their extreme manipulative propensity. So they would manipulate, and they would end up using the tools and achieving success in some tasks, but with no comprehension of the affordances of these materials and the properties of these materials in relation to other objects that would make them functional, important for their use as tools. And our long-term research changed this picture by studying these monkeys that are born and exposed to this behavior of to use since the very beginning of their lives on the back of their mothers, nut cracking with stones. We achieved a comprehension of what they perceive about the materials that is very different from what was known before the beginning of this research. So I will first summarize the first studies that were based more on naturalistic observations, the surveys that we made in the area of Fazenda Boa Vista to investigate if the materials, mainly the stones that they were using as anvils and hammers for nut cracking, these cracking sites, if these sites presented special particular features that the monkey selected to use as tools. So first we surveyed their anvil sites, the anvil stones, and we discovered that they preferred or they used anvil or less often wood anvils that were usually low, close to the ground, flat, and usually protected by a tree shadow. This type of, in the preferred ones, the most frequent anvils are sandstone anvils, and these are relatively common around the area of Fazenda Boa Vista. For hammerstones, on the other hand, they prefer the hard and resistant quartzite or siltstone that are the river pebbles that are rare in the region. So we started to think at that time that we always, in the active anvils, we always found a hammerstone on the top or nearby a hammerstone nearby the anvil stone. We started to suspect that they would transport suitable hammerstone to these active anvil sites. So the next study, still we were surveying the area, and now already conducting systematic behavioral studies with the students following the monkeys. So we were able to I have to put my glasses now. we were able to find to calculate the density of anvil stones and hammer stones, and here also palm stones around the areas, and we confirmed that hammerstones are really very rare in the region. And then we also observed that they really transported stones to hammerstones to anvils when they wanted to crack open some palms and other encased foods. When the hammer was not near the anvil, they wanted to use. So we observed a few instances, 55 instances of direct observation of transportation, but we observe, and in mean around 3 or 4 meters of transportation, but we observed a maximum distance of 21 meters for adult males and even 12 meters for juveniles. And the transport distance was larger when they were going to crack the very resistant palm nuts more than to other encased fruits such as cashew nuts that don't require a very heavy stone. So these instances of transportations, we could consider that we consider that they showed that the Capuchin monkeys were exhibiting, like chimpanzees and humans, at least short-term planning into use activity. It became salient to us that they had an understanding of the functional property of hammerstone. So the heavy hammerstones were necessary to crack open the very hard palm nuts. So we went to conduct field experiments to test this idea. We built these artificial stones with the aid of colleagues from the geology department at the University of São Paulo. So we had these artificial stones made that we could play with the properties in the natural condition. Larger quartzite is heavier than a smaller quartzite. So we played with this, trying to ask the question whether they select stones based on functional features, the material of the stone, the size, and or the weight. So we first presented this condition that is the natural condition that they encountered, different stones of different materials. So we would offer, oh, so I'm sorry, I forgot to say that what we are seeing here is this area that we call the fields laboratory, is this area where there are several anvil stones that they use since the beginning of times. When we first arrived there, they were already using this area. And so they come there very often because we offer water to them and plenty of coconuts to crack open, especially during the dry season. So for this experiment, we would clean completely the area, the anvils, of any nut debris and the hammerstones that they used, and we would offer then a nut and 2 stones. So 2 stones vary in conditions. First condition, the natural one, a sandstone versus a siltstone. So we would check whether they were choosing based on the resistance of the material. A small versus a large one, dense quartzite. And then 2 stones artificial, 2 stones of the same size but different weight, a light and large stone versus a heavy and small stone. So we offer these experimental conditions to check whether they would choose the most functional stones, the heaviest one and more resistant. And we had almost 100% of correct choices of transportation of the functional stone to the anvil. Sometimes when an individual, a subject, was doing this experiment, being a subject of this experiment for the first time, they would go for the large stone when we had the artificial condition of the large shallow stone. So it would be large and lighter than the small one. So they would go first to the large one, expecting a heavy stone, and they would and immediately they would drop that stone and go to the other one and tap and choose the heavier one. After the first experience, they would tap the stones every time before choosing, and they always chose the correct one based on visual cues to the natural ones or by tapping for the artificial ones. So again, these results evidence that Capuchin monkeys recognize the affordances of the stone materials and choose the functional ones. Very different from what we knew before, based on results from captive monkeys. They pay attention, or they perceive the affordances of the hammer stones, materials used as hammer stones, as hammers. We achieved similar results for the properties of the anvil stones. When they start to use the anvil stones, they start to leave small pits on the surface, and we thought that these pits would help to stabilize the nuts on the anvil. They really do help to stabilize the nuts. But then we make these experiments constructing these artificial pits varying in depth and diameter, and we were questioning whether they were going for the pits that make the nut stabilize on the anvil, or the pits that would make the cracking more efficient, and this is what they prefer. So they pay attention to also to the affordances, the properties of the anvil stones as they do, or the anvils as they do for the hammer stones. They also, and this I think it's super cool, it's another series of studies using the ideas of biomechanics and kinematics, filming the monkeys. It was possible then to analyze their movements, the angle of their bodies, how high they go with the stone, and the velocity with which they try to crack open, they strike the nuts. And I'm just showing this result that I think it's super cool. It shows in this study, we show that the monkeys, they adjust differently their striking force, the body movements to reach the strike force, depending on the resistance of the nut. Here we use two nuts, the super resistant piassava nut, and the smaller one that is called tucum. So tucum is an astrocarium, the nut of an astrocarium palm, and piassava is an arbuignia palm, and they are very different in size and in the resistance. So when they are cracking the small, soft, more or less soft tucum nut, they decrease the downward force is slower than when they are cracking piassava. But more importantly, I think they modulate this striking force when they hear the first crack in the tucum, because with the tucum, if they keep doing this, they would smash the nut, so they control the force. And with the piassava nut, they keep striking and striking and striking that super resistant nut until it opens, and they can extract the endosperm. So they apparently they are perceiving the affordances of the materials for hammers, for anvils, and they are also perceiving the movements of their body, the relation of their body and their actions to the efficiency of the activity. So up to now, I have shown that the Capuchin monkeys from Fazenda Boa Vista perceive the affordances of two materials and are capable of at least short-term planning to achieve success in this activity. And this is completely different from what we knew before. And we will now, I will now show to you the studies where we suggest or show that this is the result of their development within the tradition of two use. I will show now the results of a series of studies based on a longitudinal data collection. We collect data for 15 immature individuals younger than 6 years old. We followed them in 5 consecutive field seasons in 2.5 years, spaced by 6 months, with 4 researchers in 2 teams of in 2 pairs, 2 teams of pairs of observers. One observer would register the behavior of the focal immature, while the other observer of the pair would register the activity of all neighbors of the focal animal within 10 meters radius. This method allowed us to analyze the focal monkey's behavior, the immature behavior, with nuts and stones. It's the presence of this individual near anvils, and compare this to the onset and the continuance of the cracking activity by other members of the group. So we could really investigate the social influence on the acquisition of the nut cracking skill of the immatures in Fazenda Boa Vista. So first, the first result we got is that in fact, age correlates with manipulation. So they are not this activity. They are not born with this activity. They are very manipulative. They belong to a very manipulative species, but developing within a manipulative tradition increases this activity with age. All manipulation and percussion, exactly the movement of nut cracking. And we found out that this correlation is due to the manipulation and percussion of the coconuts, the fruits of the palms, not of other objects. When we look at the other objects, this correlation with age disappears. More importantly for our discussion, the immatures, they manipulate these nuts and nut debris more often when they can see or hear other group members nut cracking. So here we can see the manipulation of nut when there is no active nut cracking activity and when there is nut cracking activity. And the manipulation of other objects when there's no nut cracking activity and when there is. So when others are nut cracking, immatures start to manipulate nuts and stop manipulating other objects. The same result is true when we are comparing their proximity to the endostones. So they manipulate nuts and debris more often when they are near an anvil than when they are not. And they manipulate less other objects, not nuts, when they are near an anvil than when they are away of the anvil. And in combination of these two results, they also stay near an anvil more often when the others are nut cracking. So when the others are when others are nut cracking, they are more often near an anvil than nobody's nut cracking. And the opposite, again, the opposite result for the manipulation of other objects if they are near an anvil, if there is activity of others on an anvil. So these two results show that when adults are cracking at anvil sites, they draw the attention of the immatures to the anvil stones, to the activities. So the direct observation of the activity of others is important. However, the artifacts left by the activity of others is also important. So it's a combination of direct and indirect observation of others that facilitates the practice with the stones and with the nuts. So this is kind of, we are really talking about a traditional effect on behavior, not only through the direct social influence, but by the influence of the leftovers of the activity of others, of this tradition. So now, turning a little bit to the other idea, we will offer some results that suggest that this tradition affect biological evolution. At least it affects many aspects of the life of these monkeys. The first result that I will show is that this tradition, this behavior that is learned, on the other hand, affects the learning process. It influences memory and sustained attention of the young monkeys. So in this other study, we compared or analyzed the nut cracking activities of the focal immature in relation to the time frame between the onset of the nut cracking activity and then after the nut cracking activity is stopped. So what we observed is when others start to crack, they immediately start to manipulate and percuss nuts, and they sustain the behavior for as long as the nut cracking activity is going on in the group, but then it stops, and it lasts until 7 minutes after all the activity ceased. So it's like their attention is tuned, and the memory of the activity of others sustain this practice of nut cracking. So the activity is tuning their attention and their memory. In addition, we have observed that tool use and tool sites affect not only the acquisition of the nut cracking itself, but other aspects of their life. For example, it affects their social structure. So in this study, we analyzed the social relationships among females in Fazenda Boa Vista. We analyzed the food sources that they used and how they competed for these food sources. We compared fruit trees, all types of fruit trees that they used, only palm trees when they were eating the pulp of the nuts, and two sites when they were cracking the nuts for the endosperm, And what we observed that two sites supported fewer individuals in relation to the other food sources for a lower amount of time. So we can say that that two sites are smaller than the other types of food sources that they can compete for, they can contest, they can usurp one from another. We also observed that the association among females during when they were feeding in two sites were much lower than association among females in the other types of food sources. And we compared these associations using pairs of females of the same ranking and of different ranking, high ranking or low ranking. And this is true, this result is true for all types of associations. So females were significantly less tolerant, and we are using as a measure of tolerance the co-feeding, feeding at the same time in the same source. So they were much less tolerant with each other when they were feeding on two sites or nut cracking and eating the nuts on two sites than when they were feeding on other types of clumped contestable food sources. We also observed, comparing the social structure and female relations of the population of Fazenda Boa Vista with other populations that we study in other areas with other species. So we discovered that the females in Fazenda Boa Vista present a very rigid and linear dominance hierarchy with low signs of tolerance, a dominance hierarchy that is stable for as long as we are there doing research. So Piaçava has been the matriarch, the most dominant female in our main study group forever. And we consider that this linearity is at least in part due to the effects of decreased tolerance in two sides that could contribute to this linearity of the dominance relations. And thinking about this defect of tolerance and the interindividual association, we found a similar effect of the cracking sites when we were comparing the associations of the entire group, including the immatures and not only females. So here I am showing the association network in the 5 study periods per activity. So here is the association networks during nut cracking on an anvil. This is during any activity but nut cracking on an anvil. And here is everything else outside the anvils. So we can see that the nut cracking association network is much less dense than the other activities, more modular, smaller in fact. So we can say that the nut cracking on an anvil decreases the association network compared to other activities. So it's another effect of this tradition on their social lives. Finally, in this study of my former PhD student, Lucas Pedernelli dos Santos, he analyzed their nutrition, following them daily and annotating everything they eat. And he discovered that Capuchin monkeys in Fazenda Boa Vista, they prioritize the ingestion of non-protein energy. And the kernel of the palm nuts is very rich in lipids. And we discovered that in days with 2 use, they acquire a higher relation, non-protein to protein energy. They also have a significantly increase in energy acquisition. So nut cracking seems to help these monkeys to achieve their nutritional strategies, as well as maximizing their energy acquisition. So again, an important effect on their biology, physiology. So in summary, I hope I have convinced you that two sites are, or the nuts that they obtain using tools in these two sites are super valuable in terms of nutrition and energy. They elicit contest competition and decrease tolerance in these sites, but even so, the youngsters are attracted to the activity and to the two sites. The memory of the elements that are related to this, to eating this valuable resource that might be super tasty for them, it's tasty for us too. This memory lasts long and sustains the practice of this huge, difficult task. This practice probably leads to the perception of the affordances of the materials used to achieve the success and to obtain these resources, and identifying these affordances probably allows them to plan, at least in short term, their actions to achieve success. We consider that because these wild monkeys are born in a group where to use is a tradition, is a custom, not an everyday, but it's a very common behavior, and they grow within this milieu, that influences the course of their development in all aspects: their morphology, their body, their brain, their motor control, their social experiences. So these experience affects their skills for cracking nuts in a way that we could not observe in captive monkeys that happen to develop this skill through a lot of effort and trial and error as adults. These monkeys, they develop practicing. We think that we have to have this in mind when planning conservation actions. Conservation should be informed about non-human animals traditions. We consider that these traditions are related to behavioral diversity, to biodiversity. I hope I have shown that Capuchin's, using this example of two use in Capuchin's, that behavioral diversity reflects different developmental trajectories in different developmental contexts. So the local extinction of populations might eliminate some behavioral phenotypes, some traditions. Preserving genotypes in captivity is not enough to preserve behavioral diversity that includes traditions. So this is a challenge for conservation, and I will now show that at least this tradition of two use in Fazenda Boa Vista is at risk already. We just published this work by Andrea Presotto and collaborators showing the land conversion to agriculture around the region of Fazenda Boa Vista. And I would like to show a short documentary produced by Elisabetta Wieselberg and Luca Marino that summarizes the main findings
Plants and animals, including humans, share the same space on Earth. A balance among them all is vital for survival. Only humans are aware that the environment has changed through time. In 2003, researchers from Brazil, Italy, and the United States began the EthoCebus project. The project investigates the ecology and behavior of bearded capuchin monkeys at Fazenda Boa Vista. Capuchins have a complex social life. Mothers feed youngsters for a year and a half and take care of them for longer. Infants play a lot. Like humans, capuchins eat a wide variety of plants and animals. They are skilled in digging tubers. When the weather is hot or rainy, they take shelter in caves. At Fazenda Boa Vista, capuchins show unusual behaviors. They habitually use heavy stone hammers and anvils to crack open very resistant palm nuts. This behavior takes years of practice to be learned by youngsters. It is a tradition. These capuchins process cashew nuts in ways not observed in other populations. To avoid the caustic chemicals present in the green mesocarp, capuchins rub the cashew on bark to make a hole. Then they extract the kernel with their index finger. Only monkeys at Fazenda Boa Vista have been seen to do this. Fazenda Boa Vista is in northeastern Brazil, in the state of Piauí. The closest town is NIMBioS, 32 kilometers away.
Eu nasci aqui. Passei toda a infância e adolescência, inclusive com os macacos. Os macacos hoje, eu posso dizer que faz parte da nossa família, faz parte do nosso dia a dia. No início não tínhamos a eletricidade, a energia, não tínhamos o desmatamento, que hoje nós temos também uma área desmatada muito próxima à estação de pesquisa.
Traditionally, local families raised a few animals and grew crops such as corn, manioc, rice for their own consumption. These activities had a limited impact on the natural habitat. However, this picture is changing dramatically. Andrea Presotto and collaborators analyzed satellite maps of the region around Fazenda Boa Vista taken in different years.
A nossa análise incluiu o ano de 1987, um ano antes da criação do estado do Tocantins, que recebeu um incentivo enorme do governo para desenvolvimento de agricultura na região. Em 1987, não havia agricultura comercial ao sul e ao norte da Fazenda Boa Vista. E já em 2000, a gente já consegue ver uma grande área tomada pela agricultura comercial nessa região. A gente percebe que ao norte e ao sul da Fazenda Boa Vista, as áreas que eram mais produtivas, né, em termos de solos e vegetação, elas foram todas tomadas em 2000 já, uma grande área. 17 anos mais tarde, em 2017, essas áreas ao norte e ao sul da Fazenda Boa Vista já estão completamente tomadas por uma agricultura que a gente percebe tem uma característica de agricultura comercial, que é o que a gente já consegue ver em 2020, uma área maior desmatada de forma ilegal, um maior crescimento da agricultura e cada vez mais próximo dessas terras primatas.
Bem, essa é uma área de transição, um ecótono entre o Cerrado e a Caatinga, que tem uma estação seca muito longa, um solo arenoso, então a água é muito limitante para este ecossistema. A vegetação, a estrutura da vegetação mantida é muito importante para a manutenção dessas fontes de água. Existem áreas aqui, que a gente chama de brejo ou buritizal, onde a vegetação é importante para manter esses lagos ou cursos de água que recebem bastante água da chuva durante a estação chuvosa. Nas últimas décadas, nós temos testemunhado o avanço da agricultura intensiva na região, ao redor da área da Boa Vista. Essa agricultura intensiva traz como prejuízos o desmatamento de fato e também uma diminuição do fornecimento, do suprimento de água na região, porque muita água é bombeada para suprir essas áreas de agricultura intensiva.
Eu vejo como uma grande diferença, só que uma diferença com dois lados, um lado negativo e um lado positivo. A grande produção de grão, ela trouxe empregos, né? Trouxe o asfalto, trouxe progresso, mas também trouxe impacto ambiental com relação ao agrotóxico. Isso afeta as hortas das comunidades, também um impacto em relação às abelhas, né, que polinizam as flores, né? Tudo isso é consequência das grandes produções de grãos. Trouxe também uma invasão das terras dos nativos. Veio pessoas de fora cultivar grãos aqui na região.
Tudo isso, então, nos preocupa muito em relação aos macacos que vivem aqui, a todos os animais, a biodiversidade conservada nessa área, que pode ser profundamente afetada se não desaparecer com todas essas mudanças introduzidas no ambiente. Nós nos preocupamos que essa tradição, essa verdadeira cultura de quebra de cocos com pedras, típica dessa população, desapareça com toda essa alteração deste ambiente.
Environmental destruction has already decimated indigenous cultures in Brazil and around the world. Awareness of these losses must be accompanied by efforts now to protect human and animal cultures.
É por isso, então, que depois de mais de 15 anos fazendo pesquisa nessa região, nós temos, nos últimos anos, nos dedicado também à educação, em atividades de educação ambiental nas escolas locais e com a população local, para informar, para preservar o conhecimento a respeito da biodiversidade local e deste comportamento especial destes macacos que vivem aqui.
So I just want to conclude that with this short documentary, we want to emphasize the need for those of us that are interested in cultural evolution and non-human cultures, we have to include in our research agenda efforts to conservation also. And with that, I also would like to thank the funding agencies that have been, allowed me to conduct these field works, and Brazilian governmental agencies mainly. And I would like to emphasize this because we are living moments where funding for basic research are running away. So I really would like to emphasize the importance of this type of research. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. This was very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, we have a number of questions here. The first one is wonderful talk, Professor Patricia. Do you think that a female hierarchy is related to their performance in nut cracking?
I think we know that it's not. There is no relation between nut cracking skill and dominance. Almost all adult individuals are able to crack nuts, and we have only a few that were never capable of doing that. They are two females, but they are not. This is not related to their dominance status.
Thank you. The next one is, do they use the tools only for feeding, or they also use tools for some other purposes? For example, war between groups.
In this population that we studied, we observed, they use mainly for feeding. We have one study where we have seen then females using occasionally as part of their perceptive behavior to approach the male they are following. Other populations, there is another population in Serra da Capivara that is in the same state that where we study the Capuchin monkeys, and they have much different forms of tool use that we do not observe in this population. They seem to be super specialized in these incredible. I didn't mention this, that this is an incredible effort for them. The stones they lift can weigh like a female weighs around 1.8 kilos, and she can lift a 2.5 kilo stone. So I don't know if it's the demand of the task, but in any case, in Boa Vista they use for feeding, and we have this other example as part of their sexual repertoire.
Thank you. And then there are two questions on group size. Is there any correlation between group size and the total number of traditions that groups have? And there's a related question, how big do you think groups have to be for such traditions to be maintained?
We try to discuss these ideas that come from the general literature in variation in primate tool use, non-human primates tool use. We joke about it that in Serra da Capivara, where they have much more diverse forms of tool use than in Boa Vista, the groups are much larger, but we have 2 points. So we don't have enough. In our population, we now have 5 groups. The group increased in size. That's why we have 5 now. It was so large that they split in 3, the main group, in 4, in fact. So now we have 5 groups, and we don't see in that population an increase in forms of tool use. We would have to have a very large survey of populations to be able to say that indeed group size is related to the size of their traditional I suspect it's more related to the environment, to the conditions they encounter, and but I would be only guessing. We need more data to address this. I forgot the second question. What's the minimum size for? Again, we don't have this type of data to say. We don't have that.
Okay. Yeah, the next question in the list is actually from Eric, from our Eric Carr. Eric, you want to ask it yourself?
Oh, sure. The mechanical engineer in me was watching them and you talking about using of tools and the force that they were applying. Had you thought about instrumenting an artificial rock with an accelerometer so that you could actually measure forces with regard to food types and other things?
We did that in this series of biomechanics studies. There is there are some data about it we used in the beginning.
Okay, cool. The next one, Professor Izar, thank you very much for your talk. I know how hard it was to gather all the amazing research findings. Thank you for your enthusiasm. So I'd like to ask you about the science of tool use in archaeological sites. Can you tell the difference between a human and monkey tool use remaining at archaeological sites?
Well, I cannot talk about the human remains myself, but we had this collaboration, this big project, primate archaeology, and so for the archaeologists, the stones are completely different. The type of fracture that Capuchin cause in the stones are completely different. Completely different from the flakes that are made on purpose by humans. Madhur, who's the author of the body control paper, he also wrote something about it. The flakes or pieces that are produced by the activity of the Capuchins are very different from the stones that humans produce. In Serra da Capivara, again, they had this primate archaeology project, and they investigated the remains of the cashew nut on the stones, but not Capuchins. They cannot produce fractures, systematic fractures that could be attributed to humans. Mm-hmm. For the archaeologists. They know what they are looking at.
Thank you. Congratulations on this brilliant and so informative talk. Patricia, do you think nut cracking generates a positive emotional state in the monkeys? Is there any evidence of affective processing alongside with the practice of such activity?
I don't know. I really don't. I know that they just love nuts.
Well, yeah.
I think everyone here has tasted coconut in your life. So no, I don't think that. So it's pretty much all coconuts, palm nuts have more or less that the kernel has more or less that coconut taste. They really like it. They really risk themselves to get a little piece of the coconut. Their food calls, they call as if they are eating something valuable. If they have a positive emotion, again, I think so, but I would be guessing again.
Okay. At what age the monkeys start trying to use tools, and how exactly it starts?
Well, if we use the manipulation and the percussive movements, it starts very early on their first year already. They are trying to manipulate. they get little bits of nuts and they start to emulate the movement. It's amazing to see when there is an adult doing this movement. You see infants on his side doing exactly the same body movement, like a contagion, really. So they start very early on, but they will be able to really crack open a nut around the age of 5. But they practice for their entire life at different rates, depending on the individual. But so I think they start very early trying, and they will achieve success around the age of 5. In this population, the population of Parque do Tietê, they crack open very small palm nuts. So they, around 3 years old, they are already capable of cracking, because it's less, the task is less demanding than it is in Fazenda Boa Vista. This piaçava nut, it's extremely hard, extremely difficult to crack open. So, and with the cashew nut, they don't use tools. They have extractive foraging techniques, but then when it's mature, they start to crack. It starts earlier because it's less demanding.
Thank you. And then there are a couple of questions on the relationships between local communities and Capuchin monkeys. I am interested to hear if the provisioning with water in coconuts has been observed to have any impact on the communities. So what are also the relationships between local communities, humans and Capuchins? And if agricultural incursions led to any negative interactions between the Capuchins and humans? And thank you very much for your research. Yeah, so
very good question. And we had
a couple of people, yeah.
We had a postdoc student there, postdoc researcher. She was a former student, Noemi Spagnoletti, and she made a study based on ethnoprimatology and this approach of the interaction between human and non-human populations. And in fact, she evaluated the impact that Capuchins could cause in their corn, little crops. They have small plantations. These are small farmers. They have small plantations for their own consumption. The corn they grow to feed the small cattle that they have, pigs they have, and they would say, Capuchins, they eat the corn. But when we went to investigate, they have traditional practices to avoid this crop raiding. So they plant the corn near their houses, far from the Capuchins' core area. They are vigilant, and if the monkeys approach, they make sounds and they chase them away. And when we ask how they perceive them, they don't harm us. We live together. They are here forever. We just have to learn how to live with them. So it's a coexistence because they are there for a long time. I always joke that when we first arrived there, and in another surveys that we made in the interior of Brazil, where they use tools, asking, when did you hear that the Capuchins use tools? When did I hear? I always knew that since I was born. So, why it took so long for us to discover? Because these populations are in the super less developed areas of the country. The university was not there, the researchers were not there, and the local people, they didn't have access to schools, to universities. When their land started to give, to be explored by intensive agricultures, the big farmers go there, and the monkeys start to be encroached in small areas. Their sons and daughters go to the university and say to the professor, oh, do you know, my father said that some employees said that the monkey used stone stools. That's, you know. So I think they have this, they live together with the monkeys, and so their relation is very different from the relation of the big farmers that perceive then the monkeys as harmful to their agriculture because they are not used to them.
Okay, thank you. Andy, do you have a question? Unmute yourself. Andy, you need to unmute yourself.
He's trying. It's not easy to find the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
So, nice to hear all this. It's obvious to make some comparisons with chimpanzee nutcracking cultures, of course. And I had two questions, if I may, on that. One is picking up, Sergey mentioned about the archaeological excavations. And of course, those exist for the chimpanzees and the capuchins for, you know, over 3,000 years. But I think the results are different, aren't they? In that the chimpanzee story seems to be of immense stability over that period. But I think in the capuchins, you had evidence, I'm thinking in the Filotico paper, of changes, which, you know, are perhaps cultural changes over time. Could you say a bit more about those?
I don't know if we can talk about culture. As far as I know, I also read the papers of the group of Capivara, Thiago Filotico and Eduardo Toni with Haslan. So I think I don't know. They use these marks of that the cashew nuts would live in the stones. So I don't know if it's possible to grasp cultural differences with these marks. I really could not tell.
Yeah. Okay. But the
perhaps in the frequency of use of or if in terms of spatial distribution of where the stones are, then you could, but about anything related to a cultural transformation of the technique, I don't think so.
Okay.
But we must ask them.
Okay. And my other question was, again, it relates to something you've already said, and we saw on the video, the young very much synchronizing their actions to the adult who was actually using the tool on the nut, because they didn't have a hammer, they didn't have a nut, it was just their bodily matching. Now, I know Dori Fregesi and Elisabetta Wieselbergi have for long argued that do monkeys ape? You know, do capuchins ape? No, not really. They don't really imitate. But that looks like bodily matching. It looks like bodily imitation. What do you think?
But as long as yawning contagion is imitation, because that is exactly, they are completely. It's like you know, when someone yawns and then you do the same, or you are smiling and a smile, it's like mimicking. But when it goes to perform the task, there is no imitation. Then we can, again, in Parque do Tietê, Briseida Rezende she has these thorough development studies looking at the micro development. So their movements are completely different from one individual to the other. They even develop like superstitious behaviors. Like it's something that they did once and it's like a superstition, but they start to do some, but it's individual. One individual has this strange movement, and something that she has shown, and now we are investigating in Boa Vista and arriving at the same conclusion. One developmental trajectory to the success is decreasing the silly things, the inept movements, the unnecessary movements, and they start to tune to position. The last thing that they achieve is position the nut correctly. So they are already capable of doing, but then the nut goes away all the time because they are not. They put the nut in the vertical. So this is the last thing. But the variability of the movement decreases, and there is a huge inter-individual variability. So I don't think they are aping. It's just this thing about the movement, almost like when we hear a music and start to dance. They do, you know, it's something really badly mesmo.
Okay.
Really, I said in Portuguese, sorry.
Okay, and I guess that will be the last question from Pete. Pete,
Okay.
Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It seems as if the youngsters don't get any direct reinforcement. In other words, they don't actually manage to crack nuts for years. So in essence, they're playing for 4 or 5 years. They're playing at being adults the way kids do. Right? There must be some reinforcement in that they gain from the play itself that leads to this behavior. Is that a crazy way to think about it?
No. In fact, we discussed this also with the population of Parque do Tietê, with Briseida. She observed this, that the beginning of the manipulation was in the middle of the play. So it was difficult to discriminate between manipulative behavior towards nut cracking and play with stones and play among themselves. So perhaps there is a component of play, but they always get some little. So this is something that we also discussed with Tietê, and we are showing this now in Boa Vista. The scrounging, eating little bits of what the adults are leaving when they are cracking. I think it's super reinforcing. They get little pieces, especially when they are infants. And when they are juveniles, they become less tolerated, but when they are infants, they can get little bits. So I think that somehow they associate what that manipulation with this super rich and tasty resource. But for sure, there might be a play ludic component in manipulating and playing with the stones. You were super correct. Thank you, Pete, for your question.
Well, we have a few more questions, but I think we should stop now. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your willingness to give your talk here. I was just saying thank you to everybody. Thank you to Pat. Thank you to all of the speakers in this series. And thank you to people who supported this webinar series, including Eric Carr and Jane Kaminsky. So thank you, everybody. Hope to see you in the next semester, and have happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.